Cool. Skyler, we just wrapped up our call with Nate. It was a fun conversation. We went into, or we'll get into, so we talk a little bit about Nate's fund. We talk about, his start, how he got into Bitcoin mining and eventually into trading. And then we talk markets with him. We talk the state of mining. Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you think?
Yeah, very fascinating. Just the fact, a couple things. One, he was very early. He had obviously talked to somebody about it in 2012, got into, I believe, 2014 or 15, as we'll discuss, and even got a grant for his business,
Yeah, that's
which is
pretty
kind of
sick.
unheard of in the Bitcoin space, right? So that was pretty cool. Really have a good pulse on what's happening in real time and going from mining to trading and seeing where the ecosystem and the markets are going. I thought it was very fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it was great. Yeah. Like we'll talk about his like state of like where mining's going, which I think is interesting. Even
Yeah.
after a call, we were just like going through the charts, Nate and I, and he was talking about some of the things he's looking at, like
Yeah.
the, UTXO, basically like unspent transactions on Bitcoin, which, is interesting. But yeah, he's got some good on-chain data. I wish we would have talked about that on the call, but it's fine. We'll save that for round two with Nate. But we yeah, I think we got a lot of good stuff here. We try to avoid getting into like, what is Bitcoin, why is it valuable? But Nate does have a whole thesis on it. So if you want to go down that rabbit hole, we recommend it. There's obviously there's a lot of like podcasts that dove into it a lot deeper than we'll ever be able to. So we'll save you on that. But yeah, I think without further ado, let's jump into the episode. Thanks for tuning into the All Funds Network podcast. My name is Mike Schroeder. Today I'm here with my co-host Skyler Steinke, and we are joined by Nate Slemp. Nate is the CIO and founder of a Bitcoin long duration fund. Nate, thanks so much for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. This is one we're really excited about. We're going to be getting into Bitcoin, and we're going to be talking about some of Nate's investment theses and whatnot, but Nate, let's start from just like a high level. Maybe talk to us about your background a little bit. You've had an interesting background and kind of your journey into Bitcoin. Maybe start us from square one. Take us to kind of the Bitcoin mining, and we'll.
All right, sounds good. Well, grew up on a farm. Went to Virginia Tech. Started a tech company, then got into the tech field. Kind of my niche ended up getting displaced by AWS. I had a buddy who said, well, you should get into Bitcoin mining. And that's what I ended up doing.
What were you doing before the Bitcoin mining, that AWS?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I was building custom hardware servers, mostly for startups. And my tech company in college was a hardware-based business that leaned into that quite a bit. And,
Nice.
Yeah,
That's really cool.
I like it. I like building stuff, and building computers has always been, I don't know, something I really enjoy. So
Yeah. So your friend told you about this Bitcoin thing. What year is this point?
2014 or so, 2013 maybe.
Okay.
It's really.
It was pretty early. Actually, no, it was 2012 when he told me about it, but it wasn't until 2014, 2015 that I actually made the full pivot. Just kind of started as in a very hobby kind of way, but then it ended up turning into a real business. So.
Yeah. Tell us about how it became a business. I know you got an interesting loan. Maybe we talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I ended up working at a bunch of different mining operations and seeing what worked and what didn't, and was kind of inspired by some events that was happening in Wenatchee, where the utility there was basically flooded with Bitcoin miners, and everyone moved there for a 3 cent rate, and it overgrew itself way too quickly. And so the suggestion that the utility provided was, well, let's do time of use mining where you're shutting down during peak hours. And then to maintain the 3 cent rate, we can then sell our load during peak hours to external counties. And as it stood, it was effectively an industrial subsidization where they were trying to bring people in and they ended up bringing miners in. So that was the solution that was proposed. And I thought it was genius. I thought it was a great alignment of where the industry should be. But the miners that were there were not stoked on that. And so they never really ended up reaching an agreement. But I kind of took that framework to TBA and proposed it as how I would like to set up a mining operation.
Sorry, what is that?
Sorry, good point. The Tennessee Valley Authority. So they're the ISO for 5 states or something like that, and they oversee a lot of energy distribution to utilities. And they ended up suggesting that I apply for a grant and with this framework in mind, and I did, and I ended up getting about $250,000 in rebate funding where I had to consume the load first and meet the proposed thresholds, and then they would give a rebate on consumption. And so that was kind of the kickstart as to how I was able to build my own mining operation. I mean, I really didn't have the resources to do it, and so that was how I was able to make it happen. And between that and a credit card, the mining operation grew to about 6 megawatts, and just recently sold it. But that was basically my business for a very long time.
Yeah,
That's really cool.
Give us a perspective. What does 6 megawatts look like? Is this like big warehouse?
Yeah, I mean, it was 12 40-foot shipping containers full of computers. And so it's a lot of power. That's about half of what Volkswagen uses, which they're just down the road. If that is a comparison.
Yeah.
It was a lot of energy.
But it was pretty low cost energy. It sounds like from that point of view. What was the kind of the level at that point in time?
Sure. So it was a variable rate, but we averaged a little under 3 cents a kilowatt with our off-peak system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. And what made you? Or this will probably take us down a rabbit hole of mining, but yeah, maybe talk to us a little bit about like the sales process. We'll talk about the future of mining in a bit, but just walk us through. You're doing this for years. What was it like, and kind of how did it end up?
Yeah. So I loved it. I mean, like I said, there's nothing I enjoyed more than building stuff, and that was a lot of fun. But I will profess mining is a brutally difficult business. It requires a lot of capital. It's paper thin margins, and so I noticed over time that I did way better leveraging my knowledge in the space to trade than I did than the spreads I made mining, even though they were decent spreads. And so that's why I ended up where I am now and why I'm focused on what I am now.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, let's start. So so you're currently looking at a long duration Bitcoin fund or strategy. Let's talk about just like the strategy. What is the strategy? Maybe let's start there with that.
Sure. So the objective of the fund is to end up with as much Bitcoin as possible over a long time horizon. And the thesis on what the trades are based on is that, there's very little ownership of the asset right now, but of that subset of owners, almost nobody actually understands what Bitcoin is, in our opinion. And so when you own an asset, you're highly susceptible to emotion. And emotion is highly susceptible to volatility. And so what I've historically done is I've been a counter bet against the norm when volatility is high. And so I usually take the opposite side, and that has net increased my Bitcoin pretty substantially specifically over the last 7 years.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So you're looking to kind of time the market?
Yeah, I'm establishing a position in Bitcoin and then taking light leverage at precise times.
Mhm.
Uh, and so Bitcoin is a very volatile asset. And so my opinion is that low leverage at the right time is risk appropriate for the high volatility of the asset. And so I'm conservative in nature, but I have done well by being precise on my timings.
Got it. And your goal is really to, I guess, outcompete Bitcoin, right? Isn't that kind of being used as like your benchmark? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, simply put, I'm just trying to end up with more Bitcoin, which in nature is out competing Bitcoin. Um, but yeah, that's the goal, is to end up with more.
Hmm.
So in a risk appropriate way. I mean, that's you don't end up with more if you punt your stack, right? So
Yeah. Right.
right.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe tell us about some like the risk management that you see, and talk to us about some of like the uh when it comes to like leverage. How do you go about getting leverage and choosing your buy and sell points?
Sure. So Bitcoin is the base capital, and I use that to obtain leverage through debt, and that debt carries a cost of capital. Right now, it's actually, I mean, it's pretty high cost of capital comparative to most debt, but that carrying cost timed well compared to the CAGR of growth of Bitcoin in general, plus the market being reactive on the way up. That's the net spread on those carry trades,
Hmm.
and that's what I'm doing. And as far as selecting entry points, that's basically something I've done very well historically, and I would argue that mining has given me a bit of a superpower in that regard, because irrationality tends to manifest first in the mining sphere. And so once you see people making terrible decisions in the mining space, either on the downside or the upside, that's a pretty good leading indicator of the market in general. But there are lots of other lenses that I also use to inform that decision, including just gut feel. I mean, that's a substantial amount of how I react to this. Is just, I've seen it so many times that I know when people are being irrational about where Bitcoin is. And um, but yeah, I do have some pretty strict lenses that I look through outside of just that too. So.
Hmm. One thing I want to double click into is the mining side, where you mentioned you'll see the mistakes in the mining side. What kind of mistakes do you see from the miners?
So like in the I guess it was 2017 cycle, I was seeing people pay $5,000 for an S9, and an S9 had I think it was like an $800 fab production cost. And so when people are paying so much more on a monetary premium for future production, as opposed to, close to where the physical reality of cost is, like, yeah, we're near a top.
Yeah.
and on the downside, like, I ended up buying a lot of equipment from, I'm not going to say the name because I don't want to out them, but a very big miner nearby that a lot of people would be surprised by, where the fab cost of that equipment was $600 to $700, and I was picking it up at $3,000 Bitcoin for like 20 to $50, depending on the machine. And so
Wow.
when people are fire selling because they can't pay their bills in the mining space, that's also usually a really good indicator of a bottom. And also that's how I've benefited a lot. Bottoms in the mining world and in the trading have really been the base in which I've built a lot of my success.
Hmm. See, I don't want to take us too much down the rabbit hole here. I think there's a lot of good, information about Bitcoin. Just in general, I know Michael Saylor's got a lot of good stuff. I've listened to like Lynn Alden's book. She's got some good stuff as well. But let's talk about your Bitcoin thesis a little bit. Uh,
Sure.
what you know, just tell us about your love for Bitcoin. Maybe get into a little bit of the thesis, and we'll kind of take it from there.
Sure. I definitely should shout out Lynn. I mean, she's awesome, and her book is phenomenal. And I could say that about probably 30 more books that Thesis heavily has drawn from. But kind of at a very high level, I think Bitcoin is the single most important thing that will happen to humanity for the next several thousand years. I think it solves a lot of problems, structural problems with the way we coordinate and with the way we control. And kind of my base thesis is that Bitcoin is really, really important and people need to be paying attention to it. And as far as what the thesis is my opinion is that every short story will fail to explain Bitcoin. Bitcoin is something that can't be absorbed quickly. And the reason why is because money is a foundational technology. I would argue it's the tool that allowed humanity to scale and for humans to be the global winners. So money touches everything. And when money touches everything, the map is everything. And so when you pick a short story, you're throwing a dart at a map. And you really have to evaluate Bitcoin in a very zoomed out way and see the territory to be able to understand why it's so important.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thesis is the goal is to paint in as quick of a broad stroke a picture of the map. And so people can start looking at the right things as to why it matters. And that's the goal of the thesis.
Mm-hmm. That's
If
good.
that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And people should definitely check out your thesis because I know it goes into the investment macro, kind of just like understanding the history of money. Again, we don't need to get into all this at the podcast. And you also have your thesis kind of laid out in podcast format, which I listen to, which I encourage people to check out as well. But you get into the implications of Bitcoin, um, mining of Bitcoin, and strategic case for kind of allocating Bitcoin. So definitely encourage people to check that out as well. We'll include the links in the description for that.
Awesome.
Anything else you want to touch on your thesis that you think's important for people to know?
I think the biggest thing is I really encourage people to tackle Bitcoin intellectually and not think of it as something that is just a ticker. I would encourage people to try to view it as a paradigm shift. As I think a good analogy I heard was when Newton discovered gravity, the world looked at physics differently. And I think that's the framework I really strongly encourage people to look at Bitcoin through as like this is a paradigm shift and it's really important. And I would argue it's an intellectual race to be honest about it and to take it seriously.
Yeah.
Nate, what do people fundamentally miss about Bitcoin as just an idea? What do you think?
Well, I think it's not easy to see, mainly because it's a bit of a fish out of water type thing where we've been doing things a certain way for so long that it's just counterintuitive to everything that we know. And so you really have to have the curiosity to dig into it and to try to explore it and understand what it is. Because at face value, it looks like everything you've been told to avoid. And so
Right.
it takes digging to actually truly see it, I think, and that's not easy. That takes time and effort and energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
One of the things that stuck with me too, coming back to like what Lynn Alden's thesis on Bitcoin is like, uh, she made a good point that Bitcoin was it happened to be the first currency and that happened to work, and it still works. Where it's like it could have easily failed. We've been at it for more than 15 years now. Like it could have easily failed, and another one could have taken its place. But I think that's, in my opinion, one of the most like interesting things about Bitcoin, that it works because it's funny to think about, where it's just like it's such a simple concept, but that it was the first, and then it happened to keep working, and it didn't get hacked, and it didn't get, I don't know, demolished. It's worked.
And that's a great way of looking at it. And to expand on that idea a little bit too, I think one of the things that really makes Bitcoin valuable is kind of, let me phrase it like this. Like, if you had the ability to control money, would you tilt it in your favor? And I think the honest answer for everyone on the planet is yeah. If you can control money, you want to, even if you're trying to do it in the right way, you want to help people, you want to try to tilt the board, you want to, and what that does is when people control money, things get messed up. And so I think that the single greatest reason why Bitcoin has succeeded is because it's separated control of money from people. And I think every derivative that has come from Bitcoin, whether it be Ethereum or any other, look, I name 50,000 cryptocurrencies that have come after it. What they've all done is they've adjusted the control in their favor.
Yeah.
and,
VCs
and
get a piece of it.
Yeah, exactly. And just, all sorts of negative effects compound on top of that. And, that's why Bitcoin is winning, is because it is the most removed from human monetary policy that has and arguably will ever exist. And that's really important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I do want to talk about, we'll get into the state of the market and quantum computing. But first, before we move on, I did want to talk about just like your launching of a fund. So you just launched in January, which I think's, interesting time period because it's only been a couple months. So I think it's a good time to kind of just pick your brain about the launching a fund, kind of how did it start for you? We'll get into some like challenges and lessons that you've taken away, but let's just talk about the start from scratch, kind of how you went about it.
Sure. So kind of like everything I've done in life, it's mostly been a learn as you go experience. And I don't think that, I'm sure that there is a great step-by-step guide on how to do it, but it took a lot longer than I thought. And I really didn't start making progress until I started working with really good people who knew what they were doing. But yeah, I can honestly say that it took about 6 months longer than I thought it would to get going. But it was good though, because it made me realize how rigorous these structures are. And I'm honestly a bit thankful for the way things are set up, because it seems to be that we've figured out a few good things on how to do hedge funds. And yeah.
I mean, you're starting a new business, right, Nate? I mean, that's really what I look at it as. It's a brand new business, moving parts that you haven't experienced before, and now you're having to kind of live that real time. And things come up, and things change, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and so I would advise people to budget more time than you think on anything now. That doesn't just lie in starting a hedge fund, but that's for everything, I guess. So.
What were some of your biggest takeaways? Like if you were to do it all over again, what are some of the things that you do differently?
I think I would have tried to get to the best people to help sooner. And so I think that is probably the single greatest piece of advice I can say is like, look, I understand some things incredibly well. This is a new domain. Get to the best people who've lived in the domain. And yeah, that's the best advice I can give, I think.
Yeah, probably cuts down your time to launch quite a bit more as you're thinking about it now, looking back, right?
Yeah, and also gives you the right idea as to why to do things in certain ways. And so kind of my ideas going into it versus where it landed were different. And so, yeah.
That makes sense. Very cool. Any interesting nuances going from a mining operator to a fund manager, right? Different mindset shifts. It's definitely different.
Definitely different. I used to spend my days in shipping containers with 150 degree heat with, earphones in so I could listen to podcasts all day. And now it's I'm sitting in an office listening to podcasts all day. So,
Environment's changed a bit. Yeah.
environment's changed.
Talk a little bit about the state of the market today. You mentioned, in our pre-call, that you've never been more bullish. So what's making you so bullish right now?
Well, I think we're near a cycle bottom. I think it's highly likely, like my base case is we've already touched it. I think there's been a ton of seller exhaustion. I think there's been a lot of minor capitulation. There's been certain thresholds that I watched there that have broken. Um, I took a pretty big stand at 62, and I feel like that's going to end up being a good spot. Time will tell. Even if we go another dip lower, I'm still pretty proud of that position. But yeah, I think we're in for some pretty interesting uptrends for Bitcoin, pretty violent uptrends that kind of the global macro space is pointing towards. And I think we're seeing a lot of the real dynamics of hard money versus soft money playing out.
Where are you seeing those most?
Well, I think, the low trust environment that we've entered into is highly conducive to hard assets. And so seeing the rotation into gold that has preceded all this has been incredibly interesting. I think continually seeing the world kind of go into a multipolar state is conducive to physical assets and hard assets, and also highly susceptible to expanding monetary policy. And so that all those things are incredibly bullish to me for Bitcoin. And I think we could see some pretty violent moves fairly soon. So
Yeah, that's interesting. So if Bitcoin performs exactly as you expect, what does the 5 to 10 years ahead look like for the broader ecosystem, or broader financial system, should I say?
yeah, sure. So so my base case at the moment is Bitcoin crosses 1 million around 2032. And I know this is going to sound like big foo-foo numbers, but I think the fair market value for what Bitcoin is roughly 35 million a coin. I think it'll take a long time for the world to realize what fair market value is. But kind of my base case right now is $1 million Bitcoin by 2032. Yeah, and I'm happy to click in on that. I don't know, what would be helpful to expand on there?
You had made a statement in our previous call. You said price, and you could predict price and time, but not both. Dive into that for us a little bit.
Yeah, so when you're predicting the growth and education of a network, there's a lot of variables there that you can't control. And I really think that education is highly correlated to the price of Bitcoin. And I think that's most demonstrated by every cycle bottom continually being higher. I think that ultimately represents more educated investor base in the asset. And so it's a tricky thing to say this percentage of the market will understand Bitcoin by this date. I think there's a lot of external catalysts that will jump those numbers up, and those are hard to predict. But broadly speaking, I think you can do a decent job of estimating network growth on an education correlated basis. And it is a fool's errand to say Bitcoin will be X on a certain day, which is literally what I just did for the record. But I think you can broadly model this out in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, is there any do you foresee any white swans that could help move the price up? Or I guess maybe black swans for the rest of the market, or what? Could be looked at in different ways, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, white swans are more fun to think about. So it might be easier to start there. I think bit bonds are something that is really interesting. If there's a demand for a partial backing of treasury bonds and we start issuing that, I mean, that's happening in the private realm. That's happened forget which state, but one state already issued one. That could be a really interesting catalyst for converting a lot of the bond flow into Bitcoin. I think, um, honestly, I think the the Iran war is an interesting signal that look, when nobody trusts anyone, Bitcoin is a trustless currency, and that was something that was floated as a settlement mechanism for passage, and I think that's a strong signal for why Bitcoin matters. I mean, when the world trusts each other, when everyone trusts each other, you don't need a trustless currency. But as far as I can tell, you can't scale trust infinitely.
It's a great point. Yeah,
Yeah,
because if you're using the Swift network, US could just come in and shut you off. Versus if you're using Bitcoin, it's all there. You own it.
exactly. And so, um, more white swans. I think the 2008 moment could be an updated catalyst to that model. I know this might sound obnoxious, but I could see a $7 trillion print coming. I see a lot of things happening that, you know, okay, we just increased our defense budget by 500 billion. That's interesting. AI is now, something that we must pour trillions of dollars into. That's probably more money coming down the line. There's just so many things that say we've got to print money, and I think that's the whites. Those are the big white
The white
swans
swans
that I
for
see.
Bitcoin for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, I like that
yeah,
you mentioned the bit bonds. I know Grant Cardone has some strategy too with his properties where if I'm not mistaken, I think he's putting like the returns, like any of the cash flow directly into Bitcoin, which is interesting. So there's different strategies like that. So it's a combination of real estate with Bitcoin. He uses it because it's less correlated, right? But I do think that's an interesting way. And same to your point about the Iran war, I think that's another potentially really interesting white swan down the road.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it might be worth double clicking on the real estate side. I've seen a product come out that's pretty interesting where you basically sell equity and property at a 50% face value, but you get that capital and then can put it straight into Bitcoin. And so, the idea is that if real estate's a 7% CAGR and Bitcoin ends up playing out to be a 30 to 40% CAGR over the next decade, that crosses at some point, and then there's no capital cost to that. It was an equity deal. So there's a lot of really interesting plays that I'm seeing that are pretty neat.
Mhm.
Um, anyways,
It's interesting. Yeah, it's like almost like a return swap kind of in
yeah,
that scenario. The other thing we wanted to talk about here was it was actually just to give him credit. It was Joshua Lim he had a post on X the last couple of days. It was about basically how quantum computing. I mean, just to kind of paraphrase his thesis in my own words, not his, but essentially what he was saying is quantum computing is coming. Um, in the market's kind of pricing that in at certain time periods to some degree, but where he's essentially going with it is with quantum computing. And again, maybe some like loose understandings in my head, but like I understand you could hack some of these Bitcoin wallets, especially like a lot of the older ones that haven't been I don't know, updated more or less. But he brings up some really interesting points there where all right, quantum is coming. It's almost inevitable. So we're talking about how do we prevent this from being an issue? Because if quantum computer goes in and hacks Satoshi's old wallet, for example, you got a million Bitcoin there. That's a big problem for the market. I mean, that's obviously going to crater prices. I think even just the market seeing that Bitcoin's being moved, whether it's moved by Satoshi, he, him, her, they, whoever that is, or uh, a hacker using a quantum computer. This is kind of long winded here, but Nate, maybe let's just start with quantum. How do you see quantum as a threat to Bitcoin?
yeah, sure. I think it's a very misunderstood fear. And I think from a price perspective, I think, fear was the catalyst for every 80% crash we've endured, and Bitcoin will be fine.
There's definitely been some fear mongering. Even like I've
Yeah.
had some friends text me, "Oh, quantum computing."
Yeah, and so I think it's useful. I mean, it's just useful to just try to understand what's the real threat here before you get emotional about it. And I don't proclaim to be the world's leading quantum. Like that's a very particular kind of autist to
Yeah.
truly understand that domain, and I'm a different shade. So
What is the big threat with quantum and Bitcoin?
it's when the physical meets the theoretical. And so I would argue that a lot of the really impressive work that's happening in quantum right now is on the math side of things. And while that's interesting and cool, you still have to physically do it to render an attack. And that's the thing that I think everyone's overlooking is
What do you
like
mean by that? Yeah.
so you can build a mathematical theory on how to attack a number space, but then you got to go do it if you want to actually execute an attack. And the physical space is lagging so far behind the math side of the equation of this, the theoretical side. And I would argue that Bitcoin is already incredibly well prepared to navigate a real state of attack of quantum. I think BIP 360 is a really interesting thing to look into. But effectively, the way that the Bitcoin network is going to solve this is you have SHA-256, which is, well, you have an incredibly large number space that you've assigned to the security of your key. And once a computer can attack a number space that's bigger than that, you create a bigger number space. And it's a game of whack-a-mole. It will perpetually exist as long as we have digital money or digital security in any way. No signature scheme will ever be permanently secure. And so the question is, when does it make sense to change the number space? And functionally, the cost of changing the number space is increased data and increased compute. And so I would argue that if we were to impose an increased number space cost on Bitcoin right now, that would make it less usable. And I would also argue that when there is demonstrable proof of a real quantum attack, we're ready and we will adjust the network. And I say we colloquially. I mean, I didn't write BIP 360. I'm not. I will signal my node to the solution that I think makes the most sense.
Noted.
But I think the network will reach a really quick consensus on what the best path is when it's a real threat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is there any would there be any identification like do you think if it became a threat like today that there would be some way of, hey, it's here, it's happening?
Yeah, I think Satoshi's coins are a really good place to look, and obviously, I mean, that's another thing that's important to, like, it's not a million coins in one wallet. So, the attacks would have to be sequential over a period of sustained time. And I think, humanity owes Satoshi a bunch of debts of gratitude. And one of them is that he created a tremendous bounty for us to protect our coins against the quantum threat.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that'll be the clearest signal. But I would also argue that, look, if you can really attack that number space, there are better things to attack than Bitcoin. Because the moment you signal to the world on a public blockchain that, yeah, we have this capacity, the whole world gets alert to it. And so I would argue that the game theory is not to extract value out of Bitcoin, because then you're saying, hey, the jig's up, we can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And every intelligence nation in the world would love to operate under that state for as long as possible without its adversaries knowing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the thought of it showing up in Bitcoin is also a bit of a foolish thought. But when it does, I would argue we're ready, and we're continually building out what the network needs to to adjust to that. So
Yeah.
You think, is there any chance, do you see a hard fork as an option?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, like the closest example I think would be the inflation bug that happened in like, forget what year it was. It was very early on when a miner configured a block reward in a way where there was like 27 billion Bitcoin that got inflated into the system. And then the whole network was like, wait, that can't be the thing. And so I think basically everyone decided in 6 hours, no, we need to fix that. And you're kind of looking at a similar situation in the quantum space where, look, consensus will get met on a broad basis when it makes sense to fix something. And that's one of the things that makes Bitcoin so resilient is like, it's what we say it is. And the incentives are such that the monetary policy will likely stay the same. Well, it will stay the same. And the network will react to things as it makes sense. So.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot around the quantum computing realm, as we discussed there. What is, I think, important point you brought up is, the physical element, right? There's a lot of things that need to happen. There's a balancing act too, right? With quantum, like I think Elon Musk talked about putting it on the moon because there's some cold areas that can help with that infrastructure, but it's definitely a challenge for sure, and it will take time.
Yeah, it'll take time, and it's a real threat. But it's a problem to solve, and we'll solve it. And it's not the boogeyman everyone thinks it is. I don't think so.
Yeah. We got a few of these boogeyman. I'm kind of dating myself, but Y2K and a few other situations that would come up where everybody prepared for it, and then it became a non-issue, right? Hopefully that is the case.
Yeah. Y2K was not an issue because brilliant engineers found a solution, and
that's right.
They're the unsung heroes, but what was projected into the ethos was the fear, and it's kind of similar stuff here. So
yeah. Nate, the last topic I really want to get into you right now is the state of mining. So to kind of put a plug in the mining side of things, let's just talk about the state of mining and how it's evolved over the last couple of years and where you see it going in the future.
Sure. So mining is ultimately, excuse me, I'm sorry, a game that's a race towards zero. And a really interesting angle that I think is worth considering is Jeff Booth's thesis. He always says the natural state of a free market is deflation. And what that means is that when everyone can compete, price will trend towards zero. And Bitcoin is the freest market for energy that's ever existed. And so the margin will continually push towards zero. And that makes it a brutally difficult business.
So you're saying like energy costs are going to zero. So maybe this is somebody with like access, I guess, like these are miners trying to find the cheapest cost of energy, right?
Exactly. And the cheapest form of energy is energy that goes to waste. And there's a lot of examples of that. And so that's what miners are naturally incentivized to chase, whether it's methane flaring on what would have normally been methane pumped into the environment, or whether it's landfill flaring was similar, or whether it's just overproduction of baseload energy that needs to be turned off during peak load, or whether it's I think the single most important place that I think Bitcoin will land is in the heat realm. We spend a lot of energy producing heat. It's approximately 50% of the world's energy budget. And Bitcoin will eventually compete in the heat realm because it's as productive of a heating unit as any electrical induction heater. It's not what the market does right now. Right now, it's a waste byproduct that the industry doesn't leverage because it's more efficient to compete on scale than it is on waste as related to the value of heat. But that is something that I think will eventually change, where the unit economics will force people to build heating systems around Bitcoin mining and leverage the heat component of mining to to honestly just warm your home or warm a factory or a warehouse, or there will come a time where people do that with Bitcoin mining and not electric induction heating. And I think that's one of the reasons why I used to compete on scale. And I really see that changing to more towards waste over the next decade. And I think, there will be a bit of a resurgence of home mining, which is pretty cool. And people are going to pay what they're going to pay to warm up whatever they need to warm up. So why not subsidize it, So,
Yeah.
and
That's interesting.
I think there are some really interesting technical things that are around the corner that will allow that to happen. And I won't get too much into it, but I don't think it's a distant future. I think that's something that's coming pretty soon. So.
Yeah, say more on that.
Sure. So right now, well, the way we've always scaled chips is when you take a transistor and reduce the distance, the energy cost goes down to complete the computation. So the way that we've scaled computing is pushing it further and further down, and making it as small as possible. And when you're making these things as small as they are, heat condenses. And I think that around 2 nanometer chips, the heat density will be so severe that it will necessitate greater investment into better cooling methods. So right now we just run air to disperse heat off of chips. And some miners do use liquid cooling on existing chips, but I would argue most would have been better off displacing heat on existing chip sizes. But in the future, I think condensing that heat in a more usable format to get it off the chips and then having a good waste byproduct will be worth investing in. And I think that starts happening around the 2 nanometer range. And, I'm not a chip designer, so I can only tell you what I've listened to and what I think makes sense in my head. But I think that really is the threshold where the incentives of those unit economics really cross over, and we'll start to see that in action.
Mm-hmm. So finding a way to use the wasted heat, kind of like we've done with everything so far.
Yeah, and I think another way of articulating it is like, since mining is a game of efficiency, your CapEx efficiency is critically important. So right now, are you better off buying 2 miners, or are you better off buying 1 and investing in cooling? And right now, you're better off buying 2 miners. But I think in the future, you're better off buying 1 miner and investing in cooling. And I think that really starts hitting the unit economics at 2 nanometers.
Cool. Well, this is cool. This is some of this is definitely above my head, but this is this is cool to listen to. This is cool to see the future of mining and where it's going.
Well, this has been great. I mean, it's definitely interesting to hear kind of early on what happened with mining, what you dealt with, Nate, and kind of where you're at today from a fund perspective, and where you see the overall ecosystem going. Definitely interesting insights there that you shared. Appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you all doing this. It was fun. So
yeah,
cool.
Absolutely.
Nate, where can we send people to find you?
Yeah, so I have a LinkedIn that admittedly my business development person manages for me, and she's great. I don't have any other socials. That's literally
you can't tell people that. You can't.
It's all good.
I will have a conversation with anyone, but I hate social media. I can't do it.
Well, that's why you have a person for you to handle that for you, right? That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's great, Nate. We'll make sure to include that in the show notes where they can contact you on LinkedIn. That'd be great.